Connecticut is looking for a lawyer, and Martha Dean says she is ready for the job. Also, Ann Brickley is the Republican-endorsed candidate looking to unseat Congressman John Larson. We're going to hear her pitch coming up. And we are going to the races with current columnist Kevin Rennie. You're watching The Real Story. I'm Lori Perez. Who knew that we would all be paying so much attention to the race for Attorney General? But we are. Martha Dean is helping keep our focus there, running an aggressive campaign as the endorsed Republican candidate who will first face Ross Garber in the August primary to determine who will then go up against Democrat George Jepsen. Dean is an attorney from Avon who has run her own law practice, supervising staff and lawyers for the past 16 years. Before that, she worked at Robinson & Cole and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. She is a lifetime NRA member. Martha, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Lori.
Let's start off just giving people a basic introduction to who you are. Tell me a little bit about your legal expertise, what sorts of stuff you've done over the last 20 years.
Well, let me just say quickly that I am the Republican-endorsed candidate winning at the convention a few weeks back in the race for Attorney General, and I was also the 2002 Republican nominee for Attorney General, so this is my second race, and there's a great opportunity this year for the state of Connecticut to elect an attorney who is both capable but also someone of integrity with real leadership skills who can help bring common sense back to this office. In terms of my background, I've actively practiced law in Connecticut. That's been an issue this year for some other candidates, so we'll get it out of the way.
Yes.
For 22 years, and that's corporate law, securities law, environmental law, and a niche practice of defending shooting ranges, which is actually something I knew nothing about until a few years ago, but it's very important to keep shooting ranges open for law enforcement and for those who wish to exercise their constitutional rights.
So that seems like a thriving, successful practice. What makes you want to be Attorney General?
Well, let me just say that from my experience working in government and working in large firms and running my own firm, it's given me a broad view of what the difficulties that law-abiding businesses and individuals encounter in Connecticut when they try to do business or when they try just to, live and go about their everyday life. And it's in representing law-abiding businesses and law-abiding individuals and seeing the difficulties that they encounter with the AG's office often and the agencies and representing them in that context and winning or reaching favorable settlements that I realize that there is a real need in the Attorney General's office for common sense, for a triage approach where we look at actual harm to real citizens and real property and not a paperwork, and inadvertent violations.
Right, so maybe I'm reading into this, but I mean, do you think that Attorney General Richard Blumenthal was a little heavy-handed with the lawsuits?
In my campaign, because I'm running for an open seat, I don't mention the current Attorney General at all. He has his fans, he has his detractors, but let me just say that I would run the office in a very different way. What would be similar is that, as I have in my own practice, I would fight for consumers.
Right.
I've taken a consumer case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court with the current Attorney General's office supporting me, doing press conferences together in his office. And that gave me some insights into the workings of the Attorney General's office. But I've also been on the side of law-abiding businesses countering cases that we've thought should have been thrown out or withdrawn by the Attorney General's office and being successful in trying to get those cases straightened out.
Can you give me an example of one of those cases?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a case of a gentleman and his brother, elderly gentleman, live in a town where he inherited from their fathers a gas station. Apparently there was a historic release there. These elderly gentlemen didn't cause it. It had been there for 30 years or so. And before we got involved with the case, another firm handled it. But the state ran out of money to clean up releases like this in the early 2000s during the budget deficit.
Right.
And when the state didn't have the money to pay to clean up these releases, which the state pays to clean up all around the state from underground tanks, the Attorney General's office sued these elderly gentlemen.
Wow.
And they just were caught in this nightmare. Very expensive to hire lawyers, very expensive to extricate themselves. The contamination had been there for 30 years. It wasn't going anywhere. There are major oil companies all over the state that have dirty sites that they haven't cleaned up. And the money that was put there to help mom and pop gas stations was used for another purpose, whether it was done appropriately or not, some would say not. But it was used for another purpose to balance the budget. And that's the nightmare that these elderly gentlemen were caught up in. One died during this litigation. It's really a great example of all that's wrong with that type of law enforcement effort.
Right, and it's interesting that you brought up that example because you had mentioned that you'd done a significant amount of environmental legal work, I guess also on the part of protecting the environment?
Absolutely. In fact, as much as I've spent years now defending shooting ranges, the first case that I brought involving a shooting range was a citizen suit under the Federal Clean Water Act and federal hazardous waste laws against a shooting range to get them to change their practices. There was a large amount of lead from skeet shooting. Yeah. And the practices did change. They worked with DEP, and that case came to a good resolution.
Interesting. Okay, so you brought up shooting ranges, so we might as well get right to the gun issue because I know that has, for average viewers, has kind of become kind of the card that they see you with. Clarify, if you will, your opinion about what kinds of training students should or should not get regarding guns.
Well, let me just say that this issue has really had nothing to do with my Attorney General campaign except in the mind of my Republican opponent who has misquoted me, put huge dots in his quotes from things that I've said. But I will never shy away from standing up for the Constitution. And it doesn't matter who raises the issue, my opponent or not. I will speak clearly to the citizens of Connecticut about why it is important for an Attorney General to uphold all of the Constitution and not just parts. Now, the interesting thing that's happened during the debate in the last few weeks is that while I've stood firm, both the Republican challenging me has come around to my side and the Democrat, who for years has been anti-Second Amendment, and now he's quoted in the press as saying that he's pro-Second Amendment. So that's what leadership's all about. It's not about being AG and being the cleverest lawyer out there with the most political contacts. It's about showing leadership on the important constitutional and other legal issues of the day. And leaders go out there in front, and then people realize it's safe, to stand up for what's right, and they will line up quickly.
But while it might not be the domain of the AG, you would support or advocate for training in schools?
What I said was I would advocate for it in the sense that as an individual,
right.
And as AG, I can say that it's important when we have constitutional rights for our children in schools to understand what they are, to receive safety training. There's a great Eddie Eagle program that's provided by many schools currently. And to provide rifle teams. Not all schools have to do that, and certainly many charge to take students to a range to give them that training. But we have some of the best shooters on the Olympic team historically have come from Connecticut.
Right, yeah.
So this is just another sport. We don't all have to play soccer.
Right. I mean, it is interesting that in this AG race that we're spending time talking about that, but nonetheless, another hot-button topic that you've kind of tackled or mentioned that you would address is eminent domain reform. Talk about why that's dear to you and what you would see.
Well, absolutely. It's another constitutional issue. The right to own your property until the government comes and legitimately takes it through a proper eminent domain proceeding for public use. Is very, very important because it goes to our fundamental liberties, our fundamental rights. Now, the Constitution doesn't create any rights. It just, as the Declaration of Independence says, was created to secure our rights. So this is very important to me to make sure that we don't so expand the definition of public use that every time a city decides it just would look prettier to have a developer come in and fix some buildings up, we suddenly take private property away and give it to a developer who says he'll do that or she'll do that with public money.
All right. I'm getting the clue that we are running out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. I told you it was going to be by so quickly, but we'll have you back so we can get more into details and some of your interesting opinions. Thanks very much. Martha Dean, she's running for AG. Up next, we're going to introduce you to Ann Brickley. She says it's time for Congressman John Larson to make way for new leadership for Connecticut.